Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode on Restored to More. We have the honor and privilege of interviewing Cat Etherington this morning.
Kat Etherington is the head of recovery at Naked Truth Project, a certified professional coach and APSAT certified partner coach. Kat created both the WholeHearted Partner Program and Whole Life Recovery Program for Naked Truth Project and oversaw all Naked Truth recovery work. She has previously worked as a group facilitator, trainer, and coach, specializing in behavioral and cultural change through emotional intelligence. Kat is a recovered substance addict with over a decade of recovery and a betrayed wife healing from trauma. Welcome, Kat.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here.
We are honored to have you on the show, and it's an honor because I feel like today is fun. We get to travel, and we are in the UK today on our podcast, so I'm excited.
So while it's 10 o'clock here, I think it's about 4 p.m. there. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm at the end of my day.
Yeah, and we're both drinking caffeine, which is great. It just shows how hard we're all working.
Well, I thought I'd bring my cup of tea just to confirm a stereotype.
Yeah. Is there milk? Is there some milk in the tea? Is that?
It's hot tea with cold milk.
Yeah, there you go. Come on, we just gotta clarify. Well, Kat, can we just start by letting our audience know a little bit of your story and how you got to where you're at today?
Yeah, I'll try to give you the nutshell version. So I actually just recently, last month, celebrated 13 years in recovery from heroin addiction that I experienced between the ages of 16 and 26. So my backdrop is one of early addiction. And somebody asked me recently, was it on your list of potential careers to do what you do now? And we laughed about that and said, no, for sure. When I was growing up, I didn't think this was what I would end up doing, but get into recovery and life opened up for me in a new way. And I started to work with other people in 12-step recovery, sponsoring and those kinds of things, I developed this love for the recovery process. I mean, what a joy it is to walk beside somebody as they get better. And so that was kind of a part of my life from when I entered recovery myself. And I became a Christian quite early in that process. Met my husband, who has since trained for ministry, and so we've been kind of leading a church together. And then this, there's a huge kind of story to this, but suffice it to say, my husband and I have been dealing with the remnants of the pornography addiction that he brought into our marriage. And so initially, my sort of sense of calling was for partners, because I had journeyed this as a recovering addict, but also as a sort of partner of an addict, and felt so alone and so afraid of kind of where would I get support, and was I going to be blamed, and would it be safe, and all of those things, that once I'd kind of gotten into my own healing, I started to feel like I don't want other women to feel the way that I felt, so scared and so alone. And so as it happened, I actually saw the CEO of Naked Truth Project speaking at a Christian event, and I was just like, wow, Christians talking about porn, like that kind of blew my mind, because you feel like you're the only Christians in the world dealing with this, because everybody else is so much holier or more Christian than you. And so I was first of all super relieved, and secondly just moved to contact them and say, you guys do great work. No one's telling my story. They were telling stories, but they weren't telling my story. And they were really lovely and really polite. And basically said thanks, and you should pray for us, and that was it to begin with. And so I kind of love to tell the story of how God didn't stop talking to me, and so I just kept going back and saying, hey, remember me, I'm still here, and eventually they said, okay, you should probably come in and tell us a bit about what you know. And so that was the very beginning of my work with Naked Truth Recovery, and it's grown and grown from there.
Wow, that's amazing. And you guys are in all parts of the world. I think you said you're here in the States, you're in New Zealand, you're obviously there in the UK, and growing, like you said.
Yeah, we have positioned ourselves as a deliberately international ministry and offering. And the reason for that is because, just like I in the UK was looking out at the US and going, oh, you guys have got so much more than us. And at the same time, hearing folks in the US say, we haven't got enough resources. I was then looking across at Europe and going, who are these guys reaching out to, And so, yeah, connected with Lisa Taylor down in New Zealand. Australia is a big country. They've got like one CSAT in the whole of Australia. And so just started to get a picture of the global state of things, and really felt like, okay, we offer online support, so those boundaries are far less of an issue. And so we've really pushed into that deliberately international space. And so we have clients in those kind of clusters, I guess, down under, we call them our down under clients, kind of Europe based, and we have some folks on mainland Europe too, and then North America. And then we get the odd one pop up every now and again from some sort of random far-flung place that you're like, oh, okay, I've worked with women in Saudi Arabia. We had a client out in the south of Africa. And so, what I've learned is that this is a global issue that affects people all the same ways, whether you live in Australia, New Zealand, or whether you live in Germany, So it's really a privilege to bring people together in a community across a whole world.
Yeah, what a huge honor.
Well, for those of our audience that don't know what the Naked Truth Project is, can you elaborate on that and what that is and what they do exactly? And
yeah, and thank you for asking that, because what I do at Naked Truth Recovery is just one piece of the overall work of what Naked Truth Project is about. And it was, as a project, we were founded through somebody else's story, right? So the guy who is the CEO that I saw speak at this event has his own story of how pornography addiction has impacted his family. And so he will tell a very similar story of being called to do something about this. And I think we all have that sense of being like, are you sure? God, are you sure it's me? Do I have to? But nonetheless, Naked Truth was founded, I guess, about 6 years ago now. And the overall kind of vision and mission for the project is to open eyes and free lives from the damaging impact of porn. That's what we say that we do. And we do that really in those two parts. One is opening eyes, which is education and awareness, and just enabling and starting the conversation in churches, in communities, with parents, with families, with individuals. And we've tried to do that in some creative, sometimes provocative ways that get people talking. So we work with a lot of creatives around that kind of stuff. And then the work that I do is in the sort of free lives part of what we do, which is, okay, now that you know that it is an issue, if you are personally impacted by somebody else's pornography use, or you're using pornography in a way that is damaging to you, and other extensions of that, because we know that it doesn't just stop when you close the laptop, then we're looking at how do we help you live free from that.
wow. And what was interesting to me, just a side note here, is that you were saying that in other cultures, there is a different mindset around it. I think the United States is understanding more and more that pornography is damaging to the man. It's damaging to the wives. There is obviously betrayal that is happening, that the wives are saying this is affecting me in great ways. But you were saying that you guys battle almost a different idea there because it's more accepted. And it really hasn't been a conversation of, is it damaging? Is it not damaging? So this is like, you guys come out here and you're like, wow, there's a lot going on in the United States, and there's less of these conversations happening in the UK and around the world. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I will say that there has been an encouraging movement towards awareness here in
Right.
the UK more recently. And so, you have seen people beginning to ask questions. And I'm really, really grateful for that. And as the statistics and the science catches up with what we all know experientially, there is, I think, more of a willingness to even ask the question. And certainly here in the UK, a place that people do seem to be engaged with the whole conversation around pornography is when it comes to children and young people, and how do we protect our young people from, seeing porn at a young age, which of course we know is happening every day to our children. So that, I think, is a place where people here are more engaged in the conversation. With that said, what I was saying to you before we started recording is that there is this kind of clash of ideas with the more sort of sex positive side of things, and it's a really difficult debate to get into, because we want to start talking about, is this behavior categorically okay for people? And I think the argument is so much more nuanced than, is it okay to look at porn? And as Christians, we might have our own moral standards and ideas about that, but those don't exist widely across everybody in culture, and so we need a bigger conversation. And so, I don't know if this is true for you, but for our clients, it's about helping them to really assess their attitudes towards all sorts of sexual behavior. So it's not about saying to everybody all the time, porn is bad and masturbation is bad and you should never do any of those things, but it is about saying, what is the impact on you of doing the things that you're doing? Now, as it happens, we are an anti-pornography organization, so we do hold the belief that pornography is bad for people, generally speaking, and that we believe there's science to back that up. And I still think you can have a conversation with people that allows them to grow into a space where they can make those assessments for themselves in a mature way.
That is so good. And I totally respect that. And I think what I hear you saying is, hey, we need to be able to have conversations with people that don't have that moral compass, and help them understand that there are negative effects of pornography. You take away the, hey, it's hurting people and it's bad and it's not biblical, to people that don't have that same faith. And let's just have an open conversation. What are the effects of pornography on the brain, on the person, on the relationships, on the ability to be intimate with other people, the ability to be known, or does it lead to shame? I mean, all those kinds of precursors of really getting engaged in it, and then the aftermath of what happens to a person in relationships. And there's so many things out there that I'm excited about talking about for sure today.
Yeah, it's such a difficult one, isn't it? Because, probably if I was being totally honest, I come with the passion that I come with, not really because it was an issue I thought deeply about as a Christian, but because it's an issue that I thought deeply about when it ruined my life, and I'd love to say this, that I had some really superb moral compass on it before that. But the truth is, even as Christians, we can't have deep philosophical thoughts about every single topic in the world, right? But so experientially, I know what pornography does to a marriage, to a person. Talk to my husband, he would tell you what it's done to him. And I guess as a person in recovery as well, I was addicted to drugs. And I haven't taken a drink of alcohol for 13 years, not because alcohol was a problem for me, but because I recognized that because I have a propensity towards self-soothing and self-medicating, alcohol's going to give that to me in a different way. And so that's not to say that I think everybody shouldn't drink alcohol in any way, but it is to say that I recognize my own vulnerability in that area, and I take that seriously. So I think there's so much nuance to the conversation. It kind of makes me a little bit sad when, as Christians with a voice on this, we get put in the category of, they're sort of moral army, fun police, and it's truly not about that. When we look at the science and we look at the stories, then we see what's there to be seen, I think.
So true. And I love what you specifically add to this field, because everybody speaks, I feel like, from experience, like we were talking about before. You don't wake up and you're like, oh, this is what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to talk about sex addiction, or I'm going to talk about betrayal trauma. Like, you're normally there because of the story that you've gone through and this passion that erodes, and now you just want to help other people. But you add a very special take on this field because you yourself was an addict. You used to be an addict, and then your husband was looking at porn. So you've gone through not only addiction, but you also understand the betrayal trauma piece. And I think that is as an expertise. I don't wish that upon anybody, because, we know how much work you have to overcome in both areas. But you're standing here today, not only saying like, hey, I've gone through addiction, I understand addiction, I've overcome addiction, yet at the same time, and I've also gone through betrayal and have overcome it. And that to me is like, whoa, that's a really big deal, because a lot of people won't even face their own addictions because it's too dark. And a lot of people won't even face going through the journey of betrayal trauma, and you've gone through both. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I definitely wouldn't have chosen the path that I have walked. And yet, when I think it's really interesting, actually, I often reflect on my journey through trauma. I think growing me in a whole different way than my journey through addiction recovery. And I definitely feel like my sort of sense of refinement, if you like, which I really think is what recovery is about. It's about burning away all the stuff that I am not and building up all the stuff that I was designed to be. And so, I really feel like I made some really fantastic progress in my recovery from addiction, but recovering from trauma has just pushed that up a whole nother level. And so when we talk about things like post-traumatic growth, I'm like, I'm 13 years into my recovery, but half of that I've been journeying trauma, although obviously a lot of my addiction was trauma based too, and really the outcome of that for me is I really feel like I know who I am now, and I really feel like I can live free from shame, and I can hold true to what is important to me, and I don't have to put my personality or my principles up for grabs in order to fit in, and so that to me is a huge gift. And what I brought from addiction into recovery this is that whole kind of what the enemy meant for evil, because some of the stuff I learned out there on the streets of England using drugs is the same stuff that I use now to work with my clients to further my own recovery. So yeah, I kind of love that combination. I think for my clients as well, I think when I work with men, so I started off working with partners, didn't want to work with men, and then I started sort of reluctantly to do some work with guys, and I realized, okay, they get from me, as a woman, which is also super important, they get from me the real depth of empathy and compassion, and having had 2 children in my addiction, I can look them in the eye and say, dude, I get it. I know what it is to hurt the people that you love with your addictive behavior, and to know that pain and to still not be able to stop. And I think that for them just deepens the credibility of the relationship that we have, that helps them to begin to move forward.
Praise God for you. I'm like even getting emotional as you share that, because I'm just like, oh, so amazing. Thank you for overcoming. Thank you for being a light in such a dark space. Just praise God for you. Anybody listening to your story is just going to give so much hope. So we're so grateful.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And it's like, and there are a lot of therapists out there that just had a pull towards being a therapist and then found themselves in that arena, which is fantastic. And they do a great work, but it's another level to be able to say, I get you. And I think most of us men want that. We just need somebody to say, I understand where you're at and I'm on the other side of that, which means it's possible. Because I just think for the longest time in my life, I didn't have any hope. I didn't have anybody really saying, I get it. I had a lot of Christian leaders that didn't get it, that tried to fix me through books and telling me I need to be saved, even though I already had given my life to Christ about 500 times, and thought that was the issue. And there's so many things out there, right? And there's well-meaning people that are not well educated. And so here, have you do what you're doing. It's incredible for sure.
I felt that same hopelessness myself. It's really bizarre. I remember when I first walked into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I say walked in, I probably dragged in is a better, more truthful memory of that. It wasn't a place I wanted to be hanging out, but I do remember very, very quickly feeling that sense of, oh, people actually get better. Like, I just didn't know that people got better. The only people I knew who ever tried to get better sort of turned up back in my dealer's house, and I would bump into them. Oh, I thought you went to rehab. Oh, I did. And here they are back again. And so my mind was blown pretty quickly as I realized, oh, people do this like in little village halls and church halls all around the country every night of the week, and I had no idea. And so that was the beginning of hope for me, was realizing that other people who could tell my story had made that change. And I was like, wow, okay, maybe if she can, maybe if he can, maybe I can too.
I want to start tapping into that amazing brain of yours that has been doing this work for a while. And the question first is, so how do you start to clean up the damage in a relationship that is done?
Yeah, good question. I mean, that's the question all of my clients come to me asking. And really, that was the starting place for our whole life recovery program, particularly for men, because I was hearing from the husbands of the partners that I was working with that like they could do sobriety, they could keep their addictive behavior at bay, they could find healing from that, they could find freedom from that. But what nobody was helping them to understand was how the heck do I clean up the mess that is now left in my relationship? And so, we have a sort of a program that is our first starting point called Click to Kick, and that's going to do that basic sort of sobriety work and education and all of that kind of addiction stuff. But we knew that we needed to offer something to bridge that gap between, okay, I'm not doing that anymore, but my relationship is a mess and my wife is traumatized and doing all the things that traumatized wives do. And these guys, in my experience, were sincere guys. They really wanted to help, they just didn't know how.
Yeah.
And still now, most of the intake that I do for whole life recovery is men saying, I've been doing what my therapist has been telling me to do and it's making it worse. And that just like that face that you just pulled, Charity, is my face. It's like, like you paid a lot of money for somebody who's trying to help, and I'm not making judgments about that, except that often it's not helping and often it's making it worse. And what I think is really sad about that is that the guys that I talk to are really sincere and they put their trust into this person who says they can help, like you were just saying. And whether it's their church leader or their therapist, it's not good help that they're getting. So we spend a lot of time in our group talking about empathy. We spend a lot of time in our group talking about accountability. We spend a lot of time talking about creating an open flow of communication. Even like that's often the starting places. So what does your wife know about your recovery? Well, nothing. Okay, so then you've just got a different secret life than you had before. Let's start opening that up and helping her to feel like she can see what it is that you do with your time. So yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot of work around those three things: accountability, honesty, and flow of information, and empathy.
Those are all awesome. We could attest to that in our own story and relationship, that those were the things that really helped us in rebuilding our relationship and just getting into a place where we had true intimacy, being completely known, being completely seen. There was no more secrets. And so how we do that is just being open in anything and everything and starting a communication game plan. And just so many things that you said definitely helped us in our relationship. I would love for you to talk about the 3 stages of recovery. I've heard you talk about this in another interview, and I would love for you to dive into what are your belief on the 3 stages of recovery?
So I think what you're referring to is the APSAT's multidimensional partner trauma model. So I trained under Barbara Steffens at the Association for Partners of Sex Addicts Trauma Specialists. And I love APSATs and everything about APSATs, because when I was journeying my experience of betrayal, like I said, I was terrified. And the reason I was terrified was because I was Googling, like, what are people's experiences? And I was reading these forums and these pages of women who were having a very similar experience to that which I just described with the guys, right? They're going to these therapists and their therapists are telling them, you should just have more sex with him. Have you thought about looking at porn with him? And all of this stuff that I was like, I will die if somebody tells me that this is about me having to have more sex with my husband. Like, I knew intuitively that was not going to be good for me. And so when I found APSATs and folks associated with APSATs, I found a language for my experience that was such a relief to know that, okay, this isn't about codependency, which was the dominant narrative. This is about trauma. And so the APSAT's multidimensional trauma model acknowledges the multidimensional impact of betrayal. And that's really important to me, that that there was some understanding about this isn't just about discovery. This is about all of the dishonesty. That's not a one-time event. You might have one discovery, but that discovery represents scores of moments in time where those sliding doors moments happened. I mean, gosh, when I told that story about seeing the CEO of Naked Truth Project talk at a Christian event, I went back and told my husband, hey, this guy's talking about porn. And my husband didn't take that opportunity to tell me, hey, that's still an issue for me. So there's those moments in time when you look back and you go, okay, this and this and this and this and this. So it's not one event, it dominoes across a whole lifetime for some women. And so what I love about APSATs is that they acknowledge the complexity of that impact in a way that I hadn't seen anywhere else. And so I read Barbara's book, Your Sexually Addicted Spouse. My husband and I laughed about that a lot because, we went on vacation and I'm reading this book. It's got like Your Sexually Addicted Spouse plastered across the front cover. And we laughed about having to hide that inside of a magazine and how kind of ironic that was. And like I said, they sort of spoke this language. And so what Barbara had done in her research was understand that what she was seeing in her clinical work really looked a lot like trauma, that re-experiencing flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, the emotional dysregulation that came with that. And she looked at other trauma survivors and went, this looks a lot like that. And she began to look through a different pair of glasses than anybody had been willing to wear before. And so when you look at codependency and you look at trauma, you'll see that they look on paper very similar, because they are. We're just looking at it with a different lens when we look at it through the trauma model. So all of that to say, the answer to your question is that the 3 stages of trauma healing according to the multidimensional partner trauma model are safety and stabilization. That's the first stage. And when I describe this, I often talk about it being like, there's been an earthquake in your life and your house is in some state of being damaged. And so the first thing we want to do is go in and make sure nothing else is going to fall down. We want to make sure that the aftershocks have stopped. We want to make sure that the ceiling is going to hold if you're going to be in that space. And so that's what the safety and stabilization phase is about. It's about making sure that we're assessing for danger. That might be ongoing acting out. It might be abusive behaviors that can be present with the addiction. We're going to talk about boundaries and that emotional regulation stuff, just trying to calm everything down, get some safety, get some stability. And then the second stage is what we call the remembering and mourning stage. This is the processing stage. This is the stage where I sometimes call it breadcrumbing. It's like Hansel and Gretel. Like we go back through our life and we pick up those little crumbs of bread and we go, oh, that thing that felt weird, that makes sense now. Or that thing I thought I kind of knew but was gaslighted around, that looks different now. And that's a really, really important piece of this puzzle, particularly for restoring a woman's intuition, that sense of discernment. Did I know? Because there's this sense of like, I should have known. And I think it's really important for women to understand where they weren't allowed to know, where I did think I knew something, but you told me a different story, and why would I not trust my husband? So that's the second stage. Lots of contextualizing, lots of mourning, lots of grieving. And then in the third stage, we're doing this kind of reconnection, which is reconnecting with ourselves, which is kind of what I described as been my experience in recovery. But it's also, if you choose to stay in the relationship and the relationship survives, it's reconnecting on a sort of relational level with your partner. It might be reconnecting spiritually with the world around you. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's the kind of three-stage approach.
I think those are so incredible. I really do, because it's so important to regain safety back into your relationship, because as the betrayed, your entire world feels unsafe. So if we can just get back to the ground and feel safe again, then it's now like analyzing, okay, now putting all the pieces together, right? Because all the pieces were like discombobulated. Now it's like, okay, how do I fit all the pieces together? and then process that and grieve over it. And now how can I move forward? And
Right, and you
so
can't
good.
do that second stage until you have safety. That's the thing that I think a lot of people miss, is that if my husband is continuing to hurt me, if not everybody loves this analogy, but if you change it from emotional hurt to physical hurt, it's like saying, oh, you've got a broken nose, oh, because somebody hit you. Well, let's try to fix that up, and let's grieve over the fact that it's a bit wonky now when it wasn't before, and let's not address the fact that the person who did that to you keeps coming over and punching you in the face. It's like, well, you can't fix a broken nose while the punching is still happening. So that first stage is so important, and I think so many women have been sort of pushed into stage 3 without any acknowledgement of the fact that actually this trauma is still happening, and you can't heal from trauma when it's actively present in your life.
So true. And I think a lot of guys don't understand that. A lot of guys are wondering why they're not getting better. And they say, well, the relapse are less frequent, or it's only once a month now versus every day. Why isn't it happening? Well, every single time, from what we understand, what we teach is every time there's a relapse, you've just taken kind of an atom bomb to the trust structure that you were building. And it really just decimated everything you had done. So it really is like starting over. And we don't want that to induce shame. We're not saying that so you feel shameful about that, but it's understanding that you're not able to really build that relationship back up to where you want it to be if it's continuously unsafe. And at the same time, sobriety doesn't always equal safety as well. Because like what you said, just because somebody is sober for 6 months or a year, it can be a secret life if he's not involving her and using that whole recovery process to build intimacy into their relationship, to build safety. And I think and we believe the way to build safety is by communicating those things, putting up those boundaries that are safe, so that there's some kind of a accountability there between a man and his spouse, but not that she's his accountability partner, but she knows what's going on, right? Because that means there's that safety component there. So totally agree with everything you're saying.
I suppose a fundamental question that partners are asking, I think, is, well, how is this going to not happen again? Right? Because I didn't even know it was happening. Now you're telling me it's an addiction. So we all know that addictions don't just go away, right? And so when the story is, oh, I'm done with that now, that doesn't make sense to us. It doesn't add up to us, and we just don't believe it, because well, yesterday you were an addict and you couldn't help it, and today you're telling me it's all fine. Like, that just doesn't make sense. And so what I'm telling the guys that I work with is, what she wants to know is, how are you doing this? Like, you're telling her that it's fine. Well, how is it fine? What is it that you're doing now that you weren't doing last week when you were looking at porn last week, and so I often, what we don't want, though, is just a flow of negative communication. And so I'm really keen on what I call positive recovery actions. It's like, okay, so if you pulled into the car park of the local supermarket and there was a bikini car wash happening out front, and you went, I probably don't want to walk through that. I'm going to get back in my car and I'm going to drive to the next supermarket. Let's tell your wife that you took that really positive action to protect yourself and therefore to protect her. Because what you're telling her is, I know what the threats are. I'm not in denial of that. I know how to take care of myself, and in doing so, I know how to take care of you. And she gets to, she might have some feelings of like, my husband can't even go to the supermarket. She might have some of that kind of sense of loss of innocence and some of those things that we feel. But if she doesn't ever know that you know how to protect yourself, she's going to spend the rest of her days thinking, is today the day? Is today the day this is all going to fall down? And so absolutely creating a flow of information that isn't overwhelming or unnecessary for the partner and causing more harm than good, but actually is getting rid of the secrecy and replacing it with safety. He knows what he's doing, and that builds trust, right?
And what do you tell to the wife who says that? Like, okay, so Kat, I'll build trust. I'll be open to that when I know this is gone. So the question then she asks is, how do I know when it's gone for good? What would you how would you answer that for the betrayed spouse who's asking that?
Yeah, and that's such a difficult question, isn't it? Because is addiction gone for good? I mean, that is a question, isn't it? I can say at 13 years into my own addiction recovery journey that this is not about drugs anymore. Like, I feel super confident that I am never going to take heroin again. That doesn't mean that I'm complacent, but it does mean that this has moved on since then, right? And so with that said, and I think that's important to acknowledge that, very rarely do you find a guy when they really understand recovery who's willing to go on record as saying, I am never ever going to do that again, especially in the early days. And I think it's important not to sort of take away from them their acknowledgement that addiction is a terminal illness in some ways, right? And at the same time, we have to believe that long-term recovery is possible. Otherwise, what are we doing? Otherwise we're setting couples up for more hurt, more betrayal, and more failure. And so I wouldn't want to participate in that. And so I draw a lot of confidence from my own recovery experience to go, actually, when I look at who I was then and I look at who I am now, that's a whole new creation. And so I can feel confident that if I can achieve that it can be achieved by other people. So what I would say is that there are some strategic sort of elements to the recovery process that can help to really help the wife feel confident in sort of beginning to rebuild trust and safety, and can help the person with the addiction in their sort of journey of understanding themselves and therefore safeguarding themselves. And a big piece of that, I think, in relation to what you're saying, is the therapeutic disclosure, is the let's get the truth, the whole truth, out on the table, and make sure that the partner really understands the size, the shape, the scope of what it is that she's being asked to deal with. And that can be a game changer. And when that is missed for couples, sometimes that's where things fall down, because they haven't laid a really solid foundation.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that. And I think you probably agree that there's almost these mile markers that the betrayed can see of work that's being done, right? Not only is it lengths of sobriety, but are they diving into potentially past traumas that trigger the addiction in the first place? Are they learning how to be more open? Are they learning how to process these unwanted emotions in a healthy way? Are they in more community? I think a big deal for guys is, have they found a way and discovered the ability to be intimate with other men in a way they're not just talking about sports and stocks and job achievements and physical fitness achievements? Are they open more? Because what we see all the time is that a wife is able to understand that he's more in recovery when she sees him changing from the inside out. And those are, like you said, you were able to go, look, I am a new creation. And we believe that on everything to what you said. And there are these fundamental changes in her husband. Wow, he's changing. Like, he is going to these men's groups and he's open, he's more emotional, he's crying, he's getting angry, but he's not running away from that anger. He's not just like isolating in that. And so it's seeing those things. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, when we talk about, and if you work with partners, you're going to get asked, what should I be looking for recovery? What does recovery look like? And so when we talk about that in Naked Truth Recovery, we've kind of broken it down into two parts, because it's easy to say, well, a man in recovery goes to group. Well, that's fine. And, I went to rehab twice and nothing changed.
Sure.
So going to rehab isn't the answer. Going to group isn't the answer, but it's part of the answer. And so I kind of separate that out into recovery actions, which is the stuff that somebody might do in recovery, like go to therapy, like attend a group, like read books and listen to podcasts like this. And then recovery outcomes. So it's like, okay, if you do the stuff, what's the point of that? Because I know for sure people can go to therapy for years and years and years and not do anything differently as a result of that. And so it's not just about doing stuff, it's about doing stuff, and then the outcome of doing stuff needs to be something, right? It needs to be that I learn to self-protect first. So I am actively and proactively cutting trying out triggers myself. You're not having to tell me, hey, is it a good idea for you to go to that work party at Hooters? I'm telling you, I'm not going to that because that's not a good thing for me, you know? And so you're starting to see these guys step up and take care of themselves first, and in doing so, taking care of their wives and families. And so I think something like that is huge. Like you said, kind of getting more in touch with my emotions. And this is part of that question. How are you going to not do that again? So if nothing changes, why would anything change? So all of that for a partner is evidence that, oh, he's not just pulling off fruit from this tree that is bearing addiction, which is one way people do recovery. You know, they just stand under the tree forever and just pick the fruit as it comes. And I'm like, after 13 years, I don't think I'd want to be doing that. My arms are aching, you know, I want to sit down. So instead, I attack it at the roots. And you know, that I think for people who have trauma in their history, for people who have abuse in their history, for what, you know, trying to find out what is feeding the bearing the fruit of addiction. It's just worth acknowledging that, and I don't know how much of this you guys see, but we are seeing an increase in young people reaching out for support.
Yeah.
You know, we've got a huge range of ages in our program. I think our oldest client is nearly 80 in our group program, which I just love that diversity. And at the same time, you know, there's a reality that sort of opportunity-based addiction is on the rise. You know, maybe kids who haven't really experienced a lot of trauma in their past, but who've been looking at porn since they were 7, you know, who are now just biologically, neurologically wired in a way to respond to that stimulus. And so, yeah, just acknowledging that whilst there is a lot of trauma and there is a lot of abuse with sex addiction, there's also now this growing trend of young people who are just, you know, that's just the part of the culture that they've been raised in.
Appreciate you saying that. That was great stuff. I love what you talked about the recovery actions and the recovery outcomes. That is gold. Thanks for sharing that.
I think too, some of the things that you said were just so spot on, because I think men want to rebuild trust and safety. Yet at the same time, there's this fear of a response or reaction out of their significant other. You know, I think men want to share, like the car wash analogy, but they're fearful of how their wife or a girlfriend, you know, whatever is going to react. Yeah. But reminding yourself that you sharing is going to take action steps to rebuilding trust, because it's showing her that your behavior is changing, that you're not going back to the old ways. You're not living in hiding anymore. You're being completely vulnerable and transparent. And even though you may not think it's a big deal, you know, well, she doesn't even know about that. That may be more triggering. In reality, it's more triggering if you don't, because it seems like old patterns of behavior hiding. And so I love that you shared that, because I think it just hits on both sides for the significant other to accept what they're sharing and say, wow, that's growth compared to what they were doing. You know, like just acknowledging we are going to be tempted regardless, both male and female. There's temptation everywhere, you know, and it's really about what you do with that temptation. Are you going to be open in communication and share how you know, turned your head the other way rather than engaged in it for a longer period? And so I think that was just a really, really key point in that. That's a proper way to go about rebuilding trust and safety. So thank you for sharing that. That was great.
You're welcome. I think I should probably say as well that when it comes to the sort of sharing of information between a couple, I always defer to the partner. Like, what is it that you need to know, and what is it that you don't need to know? And whilst the majority sit within this middle range somewhere where there's some sort of flow of information, you always get this sort of outliers who are like, I need to know everything you ever saw and everywhere you've been. And you know what? For a while, maybe that is how it is. Yeah. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you'll have some partners who are like, I don't want to know anything, but what I do want to know is that there are people who do know. And so having, like you were just talking about there, about sort of the wife not being the accountability partner, I think having other accountability people in the mix is also super important. Yeah. So my husband had a tendency to overshare. And there was this point at which I'm like, please stop torturing me with all this stuff. It's like, we did our therapeutic disclosure. He passed his polygraph. He laid it all out there, and then he would remember stuff that he hadn't remembered before, and he would bring it to me, and I'm like, okay, I don't need that now, because the disclosure did what it was supposed to do. It gave me the snapshot of, I am being as honest as I know how to be right here today. And so, he did enough in that for me, that when he came back and would share this other stuff, I'm like, it's just more pain. And so, but I also didn't want him not telling anyone that. And so our agreement then was, okay, you get 24 hours when something new surfaces, or when you make a choice that you're not sure about, to go talk to somebody else, because I can't have you processing that with me. And then if there is something to share, you get another 24 hours to come back and talk to me about that, so that it kind of comes back fully formed, is how we used to talk about it. I'm like, don't bring me something half formed and kind of use me to figure that out. Like, go do your work and then come back and tell me what you need to tell me.
Those are healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
I like that 24, then 24. Cause sometimes even in my own recovery, it was like that. Something would happen and I'm like, okay, I know it wasn't a all out relapse. Was it a slip? Was it something that I pursued? So I need to process that, and I can't talk to Charity about that because that's still not going to be healthy. So I like that boundary. We always did 24 hours of just telling her about slips or relapses because there was a confession that needed to happen. She needed to know. But I always felt like I needed to process it with somebody else first. So I'd call my old sponsor, or I would call accountability guys, or I would call, have a chat with my therapist, or whoever I was going to see in the next 24-hour period. I think that's really healthy to recommend that, to go, hey, because most times I was like, man, I need to process this first, figure out, is this something I need to confess? Is this something how do I need to word it to Charity? And a lot of the times it was just me trying to justify not sharing it. Like, okay, I don't think she needs to know this. That's always our first thing, right? Is like, I'm just going to hide it and bury it, and I don't need to tell anybody this. We're good. I'm moved past it. I'm better. But most time there needs to be that, okay, I'm going to go talk to these guys about this. And I think that's super healthy. So I think that's great.
I think it's Doug Weiss who talks about there being kind of 3 disclosures that happen, and the first one he calls the BS disclosure, and that's like all my justification. That's the disclosure I tell my buddies, right? And I think that's really important, because my husband was kind of the opposite of what you described. Once he decided he was going to be in recovery, he's like, I'm not holding anything secret. And so he would do this. We used to call it the shame dump. He would do this sort of shame dump and say, I feel bad about something, blurt it all out on me, and then let me figure it out. And I'm like, hold on a minute. It's almost like you're vomiting on me and running away, and like I'm covered in sick and you feel better. You don't have bellyache anymore. I'm like, this is not okay. And so we had to figure that out. And a lot of that was trial and error and error and error. And that was okay because we were in it together. And so, yeah, we're trying to avoid that too. It's like, where, the guys that we work with, we have a pretty strict accountability process, and we give them a kind of it's not really a script in as much as they have to follow it word for word, but hey, if you're going to go make a confession to your wife, whether it's a full-blown relapse or whether it's a smaller sort of misdemeanor or whatever you would call that, here are some things you want to include in that to demonstrate that you have processed that. You want to say, here's what I know about how that happened. Here's what I know about how I want to help myself avoid that in the future. So I'm not just bringing you, hey, I did a thing. I'm bringing you, here's my fully processed, fully formed understanding of what happened, what needs to happen, what the impact on you might be. Here's how I want to propose that I make you safe, so that we're taking that out of the partner's hands as well,
Well, Kat, there's so much here. We have tapped into so many things, and we know that there is such a depth that you could go into each topic so much more. Can you talk about how our listeners can get more plugged in to what you guys are providing and creating right now?
Yeah, so you can find us at www.nakedtruthrecovery.com, and that website hosts all of our recovery programs, which right now we offer our Click to Kick program, which is our kind of starting point recovery program. That's available for men and for women who are dealing with problematic pornography use. Alongside that, we offer our WholeHearted Partner Program, which is education and support and topic-based groups for women who are married to men with problematic sexual behaviors. We do sort of a monthly educational webinar over there and some really cool stuff with our women. And then our Whole Life Recovery Program, which is that next step on for men who are seeking recovery in their whole life. So yeah, you can reach me, Kat, that's C-A-T, Kat at visibleministries.com.
Wow. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. We took so many notes. We both did individually. And this was just seriously an episode filled with so much wisdom. And we just are so grateful.
Well, the time has flown by. Thank you so much for having me.